Okay, well, Bob Bunting, our next speaker, needs no introduction, but I will tell you that Bob is an atmospheric scientist with deep roots at NOAA and was director of the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Bob founded, as you know, CAC 4 years ago to close the gap between what society thinks science knows and what science does know with high probability, in order to hasten climate adaptation while we still have good choices left to us. Bob has flown into hurricanes off Africa to study how they formed and routinely talked to his girlfriend, later his wife, over the airways, connected through a New York City operator for AT&T. All of his fellow scientists could hear the conversations in the C-130 because they were on the one and only headset connection. Talk about climate warming. Girlfriends matter. Bob will now present hints from Eastern Pacific hurricanes since 2023 and what they could mean for Florida this year.
Thank you, everybody. Well, it's always great to be with you. I love doing this, and I've been doing this a while, and this is one of my most fun times is sharing these stories with all of you, and hopefully helping you understand our risks and how we mitigate those risks. Just a second before we start, I want to make sure everybody understands that today our sponsors have made this possible. And one of our sponsors is the new employer of our board of director, Tom Lewis. So Tidal Basin, which is a very important company here in Florida, is our sponsor, along with Hunter Point and WUSF, the Sarasota magazine. And I just want to say how much all of these people really mean to us. They've been so good and allow us to bring these events to you and to make them as meaningful as they are. So we really applaud all of you for supporting us and all of our category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 members who are here. I'm looking at a lot of you today. It's so important. And Tommy's Car Wash is our season sponsor. And just before intermission, Maya from Tommy's is going to come up and say a few words. And I don't know if you look in your envelopes today, besides the QR code where you go and you donate lots and lots and lots of money to the CAC. There's also a free car wash coupon because when your cars get dirty, we want to clean them. So now I just want to go into this talk from the hints that we have. But before we do, I want everybody to understand what a category 1 and category 5 storm is. We have all different nomenclatures for these, and this makes it very easy for you to understand because it has direct wind speed, and you can read on there what the different wind speeds are. But the key thing is that the damage that we have increases with the square of the wind speed. It's not linear. So a category 5 storm does 4,000 times the damage of a category 1 storm. That's an incredible thing to think about. And you'll see some of this damage in wind. Like Rick said, and we are so pleased to have him as a senior scientist at the CAC, to be in the position to have a full-time, credible scientist living in Sarasota as a full-time staff member is just a gift to this community. And I can tell you it's a gift to me. So we're so pleased, and it's because of all of you. So let's talk about what's going on. Rick talked about rapid intensification, and this is something new in hurricanes. Not that it hasn't happened before, but how it's happening now and how fast it's happening is really important. There have been 830 tropical storms in the Atlantic basin, 830 since 1970. So we have a lot of them. Between 1970 and 2002, only 3% of those spun up from a category 1 to a category 5 in a day or so. And the last few years, it's now up to 8%, almost 3 times more. So we're seeing this rapid intensification from a mere category 1, which is bad enough. As we've seen, the flooding, even at a tropical storm, can be bad. But imagine going in 24 hours from a 1 to a 5. And this is what increases the threat, because that storm could be moving toward us and be less than a day away as a category 1. And when it strikes here, it could be a category 5. So this is something new. This is what's increased our threat so much. So here are the ingredients for hurricanes. One is warm seawater that is a few hundred feet deep. This seawater provides the energy that is transformed from sensible energy and heat to the wind energy and rain energy. And this is what creates a very strong hurricane. So that's the first condition we look at. And down below, you'll see a temperature of the warm oceans. The oceans right now are warmer than any time in human history, right now. And every month in the last 2 years, they've been getting warmer and warmer. We're in a runaway situation on climate warming, and the oceans are warming so fast. And this is impacting not only the ice melt and things like that, but the energy available for hurricanes. So the second thing is wind shear. You always hear about wind shear. I want to show you what that is. When the wind is blowing the same speed at the surface of the earth as it is, say, at 50,000 feet, then there's no wind shear because the wind is constant. But on the right-hand side, if the winds are low at the surface and they blow harder as you go up in the atmosphere, that is high wind shear. And so when you think about it, if I had a storm, and this is the eye of the storm, and there's no wind shear, that eye of the storm is vertical. But when there's strong wind shear, it leans over. And what that does is it makes the energy transfer less impactful. But when it's vertical like this, the conservation of angular momentum, think of a skater, with the arms out, doing the twist, pulling it in, spinning faster and faster. And that's what happens in a low wind shear environment. So that's why wind shear is such a big ingredient for major hurricanes. So now I want to talk about El Niño and La Niña. So in an El Niño, which is what we've been in for the last year, you can see this is a world map, sort of. The world is really not flat, although some people still believe that. Just like they believe that the climate hasn't warmed. Just like they believe that humankind has nothing to do with it. But anyway, I thought we'd go back to a flat earther here for a moment to show this. And you can see off of the coast of the United States and South America, that little plume of yellow is the warm water that occurs in a El Niño situation. And that creates a vertical motion in the atmosphere and cloudiness in the Pacific, that warm water. As that circulates over the earth, on the other side in the Atlantic, it creates downward motion, sinking motion, and that inhibits hurricanes from forming. So during an El Niño, we generally have less hurricanes for that reason. The Atlantic hurricane season in 2023 was an El Niño year. Yet it was the 4th most active hurricane season in history. That's not a good sign. Despite higher wind shear and an El Nino, we had 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes, and that turns out to be an average year these days. But that's because we had record sea surface temperatures, so even an El Nino couldn't give us a negative year last year, a less active year. Now, in a La Nina, it's the opposite conditions, and we're rapidly transforming from a El Nino to a La Nina right now. It's happening very, very fast. And the sinking air over the Pacific will be what we see this summer. And when we have that, we have the opposite in the Atlantic, that is rising air. When air rises, the parcel of air cools down and condensation happens, and there's a release of heat in the atmosphere, and we get rain and the spin up of hurricanes. So when we're in a La Nina, it's very favorable for hurricanes. So I'm already telling you 2 big things, right? About really warm seawater and a La Nina, the second ingredient. So recent seasons have been epic for rapid intensification. For 2023, we had 3 storms that went into the rapid intensification mode, and that is the entrance to our beautiful, iconic Sarasota Bridge that, by the way, nobody wanted that either, right? And now it's the icon of Sarasota. Beautiful bridge. This is what it looked like last year. All those storms, 21 storms in a La Nina year, but look where they were. They were all out in the Atlantic, and they were all curving out to sea. This is what we see in a El Nino year. And in the center, you can see what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. We did get Idalia, but it was kind of quiet last year in the Gulf of Mexico. If you go back to 2020, this was a La Nina year. And look at the storms in the Atlantic, right? There were still quite a few. But look what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is why I'm very concerned about this year, because we have less African storms during La Nina years and more storms in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is why we really need to pay attention this year. So recent seasons have been epic for intensification. In 2020, these were all the storms that went through rapid intensification that year. Instead of 3, I don't know how many there are there, but it filled up the whole page. And by the way, we went through the alphabet 2 times that year. We went through the American alphabet and the Greek alphabet and almost ran out of the Greek alphabet too. There were 30 storms that year. That was the most storms ever. And by the way, that was Coconut Avenue, you know where our, well, let's see if I can get that back, yeah. That's downtown Sarasota. During a tropical storm in November called Eta, it was not a hurricane, and the water is coming in. So we are going to see a lot more flooding than we're used to from garden variety storms, because it's happening on top of a sea level that's already 9 inches higher. So last year, our forecast was for 7 hurricanes and 2 to 3 major hurricanes. And last year we had 7 hurricanes and 3 hurricanes. So we're kind of proud of that. And actually over the last 3 years, our hurricane forecasts have been pretty accurate, with, well, only varied by one way or the other over 3 years. So I think we have some skill in doing this, and hopefully we can use that skill to help prepare our community. So the Eastern Pacific was on fire last year. Hurricane Hilary hit in August, the first tropical storm warning ever for the city of San Diego. They've never had one before. They experienced tropical storm winds. And that picture on the left there is Death Valley, the driest place in the world after Hurricane Hilary. I'm going to show you some more pictures of that in a minute. On the right is the ocean front at Acapulco, Mexico, which in late September experienced its first ever Category 5, its first ever Category 4, its first ever Category 3, its first ever Category 2. In all of the history of Acapulco, there's only been one hurricane, and it was a Category 1. And then they got Otis, a Category 5 storm. The hurricane in Death Valley came up, as you see, and the rainfall on the right shows the rainfall in the desert of California, which in some places was more than 11 inches. The average rainfall in that desert a year is less than 1. They had 11 years worth of rain in a day in some places. This shows you the variability of a warming climate that you can't hide anywhere. It's happening everywhere. And this is what it looked like in California and in Death Valley. The picture with the snowplow that's Death Valley, California. To give you an idea, it's between Las Vegas and Fresno, California. It's pretty far north. And yet, on the left is what it looked like before Hurricane Hilary. It was such a dramatic thing that I went out myself. I had to see it with my own eyes because this is a once in human history event. Or once in my lifetime for sure. And I took that picture on the right. And so this is a satellite picture. Before, on July 5th last year, that green, by the way, is not water, that's salt, the salt flats. The middle is the day after the clouds cleared from Hurricane Hilary. And that blue, that deep blue is all water. And on the right was just a couple of weeks ago. So the water is still there in the desert. Amazing. Nobody predicted that. Everybody thought it would be gone by November. It's still there. So this is Hurricane Otis as it's hitting the coast of Acapulco. It was a direct hit of a Category 5 storm. I want to talk just briefly about it. This is what the wind speed looked like. In red and in purple were winds, over 120 miles an hour. And you can see the path of the storm. And as this storm moved in, the hurricane forecast models were forecasting a Category 1 storm, not a Category 5 storm. The official forecast is all the models that we run, the hurricane models. You can see all the curves, and the black line is actually the observed wind. Now, this is kind of scary because usually our models are really, really good, but it didn't pick this up because the observations we have down in that part of the world are fewer and further between. So we don't have good data to feed the models, and the models then don't know really either what's happening. So that picture you're looking at now are sea surface temperatures. And those sea surface temperatures in red are close to 90 degrees. When that storm went from the cooler water over that 90-degree water, it intensified in 24 hours from a 55-mile-an-hour tropical storm to a 165-mile-an-hour monster hurricane. This is what that part of Mexico looks like. Those are all the hurricane paths, and you can see they don't usually have hurricanes. They go by, and then when they do, they're weak, but not any longer. This is what the beach in Acapulco looked like the next day. The storm intensified so fast, there wasn't much of a storm surge, but it blew the hell out of Acapulco. This is a wind damaged storm. These are buildings along the coastline. Now, their building codes aren't quite as good as ours because they never had a Category 2 hurricane before. The peak wind gust in Acapulco that they ever had was 112 miles an hour. That's a peak wind gust. The peak wind gust that they got from this storm was a measured, perhaps world record, 203 miles an hour. This wind was so strong, it bent the buildings. The entire buildings, 20, 30 stories high, bent. This is what their Marina Jacks look like. Downtown. So Hurricane Otis, the models failed to fully forecast this amazing event. The storm was forecast to strike, but not as a major hurricane. There was little time to evacuate. 55 people died. How many washed away? We may never know. Property damage is estimated at 15 billion in this city of 1 million people. Could Acapulco happen here? It could. The Gulf of Mexico can have sea surface temperatures above 90 and did last year and probably will this year. Wind shear can be really low in La Nina years, and Hurricane Lee in the Atlantic during an El Nino last year increased 110 miles an hour wind speed in 24 hours time. But because of the investment that we've made in situ observations, that is observations in the atmosphere and in the ocean, our models will be informed with better data, and the chances of a failure like in Acapulco is a lot less here. But that won't change the fact that we are having rapidly intensifying hurricanes, and it could happen very close to our coastline and decrease our ability to leave. So what this means to me, and this goes back to your question, it means that we have to be very aware of what's going on a daily basis when there's hurricanes or tropical storms in the Gulf. Just because it's a tropical storm does not mean that tomorrow it won't be a Category 5 hurricane. We may not get days to evacuate the Keys, Lido Key, Longboat Key, Siesta Key, etc. We only may have hours to do it. The kind of preparation that we've done in our emergency management for the last 50 years is probably a little passé for the climate that we now have. We need to revisit what we do because the rules have changed, but we may not realize how much they've changed. So this is a wake-up call we're getting from the Pacific last year when they were experiencing low wind shear. They'll have high wind shear this year, and we're going to have the low. What do we do in a very highly populated area? We can't evacuate everyone. Where should people go? How should we organize our community for what I call shelter in place, where we get people away from the shoreline by about 10 miles, but they don't have to go to another state because we can't leave that quick. But we could change the way we organize our future if we decide to do it. And I'm giving you the information that today that says we had better do it. So now, given these facts, what are your thoughts about how we should adapt to this new threat in the future beginning now? Let's discuss this for a few minutes. And I know Elizabeth is going to have some questions.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask.
Oh,
So let's just open up to the audience about what would your recommendations be for Bob and for policymakers? And then I'm sure Bob will give you his.
And telling us. I think the commissioners, both county and city, with the exception of Jennifer Ahern Koch, is not familiar with this. And maybe you can give a presentation at one of the meetings or ask for a presentation because they need to hear this. Because they're constantly approving development on the coast and we're trying to stop that. But they kind of deny all this that you're saying.
Vice President, I know that Jen Koch is always at these meetings and she cares deeply about this and takes everything into consideration. Deborah?
It's difficult to educate people because there's so much resistance, especially in the political climate. It would be helpful if we were armed with facts and figures and pictures that we can give to people to show them and talk to them. I also suggest targeting the wealthier population, a lot of whom are in denial of this. For instance, doing lectures at the yacht club, the field club, because these are people who have boats and they might want to know what's going on and they'll pay more attention. And they also, a lot of them live in longboat and on the water. And you want to, if you come across just education, not trying to cause controversy, but these are some things that you might want to look at to prepare for. You'll make them more aware.
Thank you, Deborah. I know that Bob and Rick and I are beating the sidewalks and getting the word out through CAC. So all the more reason for everyone to support CAC, bring all this information, all this data to the public.
I will say this, that in the last year, we've given more than 50 presentations to various groups in the Sarasota area. I think 4 times I've spoken at the yacht club, for example, out on Longboat Key, to homeowners associations, to the Sarasota Institute of Lifelong Learning. We had over 1,000 people show up in 3 days to hear similar things. I know one of our climate champions sitting back there, I'm looking at him right now, David Schaefer, please stand up, one of our climate champions. He is doing a lot of that work too. We're all trying to get the word out in a way, and it's not a political situation. These are measurements. These are things that are happening. Whether we use this information we have to change to meet the need that we have. And we have a lot of resources to do that. But we just have to take the time to get all of that information in the decision-making process so that we can modernize our decision-making process. And I think that's what you were saying. And I know that I can honestly tell you that the Sarasota City Commission is doing that in their way. I know all of them. I'm invited to talk to them. Jen actually spent 2 hours with me 2 years ago talking about this very thing. And we are not moving fast enough for the threat, which is moving faster than we are. But the information is getting in. And, the fact that a climate scientist is on the Purple Ribbon Committee for the Van Wezel is something brand new in our community. This is a great, in my opinion, of course, it's me, but that it wouldn't necessarily have to be me. But the fact that climate information is getting into the decision-making process. Now we have to use that information and do something with it. And that's what we're promoting. We want action now. We want to make sure this information is hitting home, that we're mitigating the risk that we can by adaptation, because that's the only real choice we have right now.
Ma'am, do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I like what you said about not having to get on the highway and driving miles and miles. You could just go 10 miles inland, which my family and I did, and my neighbors during Ian, I guess. We just went to a hotel and we had a great time, 3 days, never lost power. I live 3 miles from the water. We were probably 10 miles from the water. So how about advising hotels, open your doors and let's not do price gouging during a hurricane.
Sir?
Is if a knowledgeable source like the CAC could maybe release probability at the time of kind of voluntary evacuation, probability that Longboat Key will have a mandatory evacuation. So you start out at 5%, all of a sudden you get to 30% and I'm out of there, because the key is to get the people who are most exposed to leave before they are forced to.
Mhm.
That way the traffic jam will be less. But it's very hard just watching TV, trying to figure out yourself, is it going to hit us or not? And CAC has the capability, intellectual capability to provide that guidance. If it's a 5% probability that we're going to have a mandatory evacuation, the heck with it. Starts to go from 5 to 20, maybe a portion of that population doesn't wait until the mandatory evacuation. They say, I'm getting out of here, I'm going to visit my cousin. And you get a earlier flow of people off the most vulnerable areas.
Thank you. We have a recommendation from the front row. Monique?
Lakewood Ranch to do a presentation, but also to look like what are the areas in Sarasota that are relatively safe and what can be set up in those areas to help the rest of the community.
I just want to comment a bit on that because, it's really interesting how our topography is. For instance, I'll tell you a real story is that I used to live on Longboat Key, and I love Longboat Key. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I did not move only for the reason that I thought we were going to get a lot more threat. That was a reason. But I knew we were starting the CAC and I wanted to be, close to downtown. But when I did decide to move, I did an analysis of how high various neighborhoods were in Sarasota. And I found the highest point in downtown. And they happened to be building a condo there. And I bought one.
So know your elevation.
I am in unit 911. This is a true story. But it's 28 feet above sea level. It's called the Mark Sarasota. And by the way, I have some of my colleagues here from the Mark Sarasota, so they know the story already. But, when you make a choice, you should be using elevation as part of where should I go? Because I feel safer there than I probably could be in a lot of other places. Lakewood Ranch is relatively away from the shoreline, so it's going to have less wind issues. But as we saw in the flooding can be even on the inland side, and Lakewood Ranch really is lower than downtown Sarasota. So this is not commonly known, but with a little effort, you can know your elevation. You can plug your address in and it will tell you what your elevation is. We have all these tools now. We have all this data now. We're just not used to using them, but they're there to use. I use them. I think I made a good decision. I think you can make a good decision. And the decisions are made one person at a time, one community at a time, one town at a time, one state at a time. That's how we do it. And we're able to do that now. And we should take the time and do it.
Great. Voices from the public are really important. So I want to take a few more hear more of your recommendations. David, please share.
But to your point, Bob, this starts to become a real urban planning challenge, doesn't it? Because as we continue to add more concrete and as we continue to build neighborhoods up, that changes the hydrology of how water moves through our areas. And that could have devastating effects to the older neighborhoods that can't build up, right? And we can't build the whole place up, but where are we going to get all the dirt? I mean, we can't build everything up. So choices are going to have to be made. So, I mean, I commend you for your efforts, and I hope that you are working with urban planners all over the state, so they can make better choices about how we're going to channel the water and get it back out to sea instead of being trapped on land.
We're going to talk about infrastructure coming right up, which is where you're going. But what I would say is think about Sarasota, right? We have the Sarasota Bayfront, which is like one of the most beautiful places ever, right? We're so lucky we have it. And we have, Selby Gardens. We have Selby Gardens, and they've climatized their campus. Jennifer Romanecki won a Climate Champion Awards because she used this information to inform the decision-making and did something about it, and it's happened. This is inspiration for the rest of us. We have the Bay. The Bay is building up. We're going to have a performing arts center at 18 feet above sea level someday, hopefully, in the Bay Park, which part of it has been raised so that it's going to be safer. And the design of the waterway to filter all the water and move the water through is one of the most amazing technological advances around, and it's already been done. As we go north, we have the Ringling, and then we have this beautiful campus, and we have New College. And all of those are going to be modernized in the next, and this one is being modernized right now. But there are plans in place. And Stephen High, is Stephen in the audience here today? I think he is. There he is. Stephen and I met a week ago and talked about this very thing, about how can we bring all of these crown jewels, I call them, on Sarasota Bay together to actually have the same view on climate and how to climatize these places to the extent we can. We can't eliminate the risk, but we can manage the risk. We can lower the risk by using intelligent processes and coordinated processes to make a better future. And so these things are happening, and we want to make them happen faster. I'm impatient about this because I see what's happening. So I want to make it happen as quick as we can.
Okay. Your recommendation.
Yeah, good morning, Bob. I want to follow up with a question that has to do with preparation and the amount of warning you get. There's a distinction between hurricane watch, hurricane warning. And I think it's a case in the HOA I live in, and many others, that you cannot put up screens and close shutters and put up hurricane protection until you get a warning. Otherwise, it violates the HOA rules. Can you address the question about how rapid intensification affects the amount of time you have to prepare after a warning, and what happens after that? I mean, what's the gap in time to anticipate between warning and the arrival?
Well, it's a great question, and it depends on where the storm forms. If we get a storm like Irma, we had days to prepare, and we evacuated 6 million people from Florida. I mean, this was like the biggest evacuation in U.S. history. And it was successful. It was chaotic. It was a mess. But we did that. But we also have this example, Hurricane Otis, which the day before was just a puff of wind and hit as a Category 5. There was no time to evacuate. So this is the thing that's different. This is how it's changed. Just because we're used to having a long warning time, and NOAA is so good at doing this. I mean, they're amazing what those people do. And, I worked for them for a long time. I have incredible respect for what they do. But they can't change what's going on. And sometimes warnings are going to be short, and there's not going to be a lot of time. I would say most of the time we're going to have at least a day's notice, but don't depend on it. A warning is when an area is expected to have sustained winds over 74 miles an hour. A watch is when conditions look like there's going to be a warning, but it's not sure yet. In other words, we're not so sure where the storm is going to go inland, et cetera. There are a lot of unknowns. So a watch usually precedes a warning in a perfect world. We want to watch, that gets everybody tuned in, and then get ready to leave. And then a warning is like, okay, take cover. You know what you're going to do. You know where you're going to go. And then that's where the communities get involved with evacuations. And you know, what we want to do is support the emergency operators with the information we have. We don't want to do, we're not replacing what they do. We want to help inform what they do, because we already have a process and we just need to use all the information and making it as efficient and effective as possible.
Okay, great recommendations and questions. Bob, would you like to take one more question? Should we move on to our next speaker?
Let's move on.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Our next speaker, Guillermo Franco, hails from Spain and is not related to Francisco Franco. Ole!
I know.